Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Vanessa from Brio Health in Richmond, BC. And today I'm going to talk about strengthening your first line of defense. It's going to be all about the skin and mucous membranes. I had a little bit of technical difficulty this afternoon, so sorry if any of you were waiting for me to start a bit earlier. I was also tinkering with the content of this talk, and I realized I was a little bit in over my head. This is a common pattern that I've detected in myself and am actively trying to address to keep things simple. Whenever I get into a topic, I try to pick things that aren't as well covered, things that are often overlooked and underappreciated. And that always leads to quite a bit of effort in the beginning of trying to convince my audience of why we need to focus on the thing that I want to talk about. So, as I've done with other talks, this is going to be a two-part session. So, I'm going to go into the basics of skin and mucous membrane barrier function and talk about gut and mucosal associated lymphatic tissue in the next 20 minutes or so. And then this Saturday, there is usually two master classes that the NDs at Brio share every month, and no one signed up for the second slot. So I'm going to continue this talk this Saturday at 3 p.m. So without further ado, let's get into the content. As is often quoted, 70 to up to 80% of our immune cells are found within the gastrointestinal tract. And this is where a large proportion of our mucous membranes are found that are related to immune function. Maintaining barrier function is critical, so critical to overall health. You may have already heard of skin barrier function, and this is something that more people have hands-on experience with. For example, using barrier cream when you're working with harsh chemicals, as I once did as a fine arts or printmaking student, or even to protect against irritation from our body's own fluids. Perhaps you've used diaper rash cream on your child, or in an older population with seniors who suffer from incontinence-related dermatitis due to lingering moisture and dampness, so similar to the nappy rash, that is impacting our skin barrier function. Mucous membranes are just like the rest of our skin, but on the inside. They can be found inside the lining of your mouth, inside your nose, and of course throughout your gut or digestive tract. The lining of the gastrointestinal tract is especially vulnerable because it is so very thin, just one cell layer thick. And the reason for this is that it contributes to its function. So not throughout the gastrointestinal tract, I'm just going to call it the gut for simplicity's sake, is it as thin as one cell, but that is the kind of minimum. And this is primarily in the small intestine, because that's where most of our nutrient absorption actually takes place. It is very thin and it has a high surface area, which makes it great for absorbing things. but it also makes it more sensitive and susceptible to injury. Thinking, think about how easy it is just to scrape a layer of skin um, on the outside of your body. Both the innate and the adaptive immune system contribute to this very important barrier function. This is the part where I started getting a bit technical and I tried to make it more fun and relevant. So do tell me if anything needs to be clarified, and I hope I don't lose you here. So, Immune System 101. There are two parts. There's the innate, the non-specific portion of our immune system, and this is truly the first line. It consists of physical, chemical, and cellular defenses against invading pathogens. It works quickly within hours of antigen exposure. An antigen is a toxin or foreign substance that creates an immune response in the body, such as the production of antibodies. So, innate immunity can be physical, as in the skin, it's a physical barrier. Chemical, there are proteins in our blood that respond in a chemical fashion. And then there's also cellular. So the number of circulating white blood cells is yet another example of innate immunity. And this is one that we can actually readily measure as a part of regular lab work. So often one of the first things you see on your lab reports is something called the CBC, the complete blood count. And there you'll see MCH, MCV, hemoglobin, platelets, that type of thing, red blood cells. And then the second portion will be the differential, and that's all about your white blood cells. So the innate white blood cells are things like natural killer cells, mast cells, and then these are things that you'll actually see on your report. Eosinophils, basophils, and phagocytic cells. So those are cells that engulf other cells that don't belong, such as neutrophils. You can also see that on routine blood work. Lymphocytes, which is also on the white blood count or differential part, consist of B and T cells. Adaptive immunity, so that's the second part of our amazing immune system, is considered acquired. So it's more specific and based on what you've been exposed to throughout your lifetime and involves immune cell memory. It's antigen specific. So again, those are the toxins or foreign substances that create an immune response. It's antigen specific and much more complex. I'll try my best to break it down here. So antigens have to be processed in order for them to be recognized by our immune system. So once they're processed and we know what we're dealing with, a proper immune response can be mounted to specifically attack that antigen. And this normally works very well. But there are instances where there's a case of mistaken identity, and things can go haywire. A classic example of this is autoimmune disease. This is primarily driven by the adaptive immune system. Autoimmune disease happens when your adaptive immune system attacks your own body's self cells due to misproper labeling and recognition. Further, in the presence of cancer in the body, specific immune responses against the tumor occur, which results in a very specific but rare set of symptoms known as paraneoplastic syndromes. Adaptive immunity is also at play with repeated exposure to antigens that yield increasingly severe immune reactions. Here I'm talking about an anaphylactic allergy. So the first 1 or 2 times that you get it, it might still be anaphylactic, but more of a local reaction, maybe a little bit of lip swelling or some hives. But with more exposure, more faster recognition, and the involvement of immune memory, later on, that small reaction can become systemic, and that's when it becomes life-threatening. So that immediate hypersensitivity reaction occurs due to the antigen and antibody, which is produced in response to it, when those two things are interacting. A large amount of IgE, immunoglobulin E antibody, is produced by our plasma cells, or our B cells, in response to allergens, which can be food, peanut, shellfish. It can be even environmental, pollen, dander, that type of thing. And treatments for these IgE reactions include something like allergy shots, which is a treatment to desensitize the immune system. And how it works is it counteracts the rise of IgE antibodies by stimulating the production of other antibodies, more beneficial antibodies, or less severe, risky antibodies like immunoglobulin G and A. These can neutralize the allergen by blocking its ability to bind to the deeper IgE found on the cells. And so by binding to the IgG and IgA that's available, it doesn't allow it to bind to IgE, because when it binds to the IgE, you get a release of things like histamine and inflammatory cytokines and prostaglandins. I'm going to include a diagram in the summary for today to try to illustrate the process that's happening that I'm trying to describe. When I was preparing for this talk, this is the point when I realized I was probably in over my head with the time that I was trying to work in, and also the value that I could offer in terms of practical tips. And that's why we're going to do a part 2 on Saturday for this talk. So there are 100 to upwards of 150 lymph nodes throughout the digestive tract. We often are primarily aware of the lymph nodes around our face and neck. When we're sick, we can find tender nodules, or you can visibly see them enlarged around our neck and face, but they also exist in the digestive tract. And they act like stations for heightened interactions between antigens. So those are the toxins or foreign substances that create an immune response in our body, antigen-presenting cells, and regulatory and effector cells. And we call these lymph nodes in the digestive tract the GALT. The GALT is the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. GALT is a part of MALT, mucosal-associated lymphatic tissue, which is found in our other mucosal barriers. So these are things like eyes, mouth, the surface of our lungs, breast and vaginal tissue, the skin, and a portion of the gut is made out of Peyer's patches. Peyer's patches have a very high concentration of antigen-presenting cells and lymphocytes. So I mentioned lymphocytes before. These are B and T cells. They actually refer to the tissue of origin. So B is for bone marrow and T is for the thymus. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on the thymus because this gland is really overlooked, and it's not to be confused with the thyroid. So the thyroid is up here, and you can really feel it when you swallow. Be gentle. And the thymus is below your collarbone, about 2 inches in the middle of your breastbone, just underneath there. And one thing I've heard is that tapping on the thymus helps stimulate it. And I'm going to look into that and report back on Saturday for the extension of this talk. Thymus, to help us identify the area, I thought I would bring up one of my favorite mind-body activities, which is the mind gems. And it's come up in some of my other talks before. This move is called cross and touch at the thymus, and its intention is to clear shock, anxiety, and self-destruction. It's a moment also of self-care. I was feeling a little disappointed in myself for not being able to work within the time requirements I set out for this Facebook Live. So I'm going to do this with you, and I encourage you to join me wherever you are. So we are going to cone our fingers. So that's like this. So that makes your finger pads accessible. And you're going to touch your right finger pads to the left side of the thymus. So measure about 2 inches down from the top of your sternum or your breastbone, just below the prominence. There's a little peak if you trace your finger down. And then with our left hand, we're going to touch the opposite side of the thymus, the right side. So here it is. And we're going to hold this for 12 seconds. And this might be a good time to state an intention, such as, I choose to feel calm and value my efforts. And then after 12 seconds, you would switch. So that's the thymus. Peyer's patches are mostly found in the lining of the ileum. This is the most distal part of the small intestine. They help to determine which antigens can pass through into the lumen, or the inside hollow part of the gut, including those produced or present in both good and bad bacteria, viruses, fungus, as well as food. So once they pass into the lumen, the inside, they can be introduced to antigen-presenting cells, which then in turn introduce them to T cells, the thymus cells. There is an abundance of antibody secreting B cells, those are the bone marrow cells, in gut-associated lymphatic tissue, as well as MALT, mucosal-associated lymphatic tissue. And these B cells can secrete immunoglobulin A, Remember in immunotherapy how more IgA and IgG could help with uh, anaphylactic or IgE type responses where a lot of histamine and inflammatory mediators are released by neutralizing them before they can interact with the IgE. So the lovely thing about secretory IgA is that it can interact with these antigens while they're still outside of our body. It doesn't need to wait till it gets processed and absorbed through our small intestine and the rest of our digestive tract. It is keeping the defense strong on the outside. And so IgA can be found in secretions like breast milk. So what the mother consumes can impart immune defense in the child. Our saliva as well as our tears. However, when we are in sympathetic dominance, so a high stress, fight or flight, freeze or fragment state, our ability to produce these secretions like tears and saliva and even breast milk are negatively impacted. So many times my mouth has gone bone dry during a presentation, and this is due to just heightened, it's good stress, eustress, but just heightened alertness to focus and perform well. So by our stress response, our fight and flight, this is just another way that it can negatively impact our immune system by decreasing the amount of beneficial secretions with immune protectant functions. Secretory IgA has been shown recently to actually regulate the intestinal barrier itself. IgA antibodies are produced both in response to good and bad bacteria. And I was reminded recently that it can also be used as a laboratory marker to assess your mucosal immune health, so the state of your malt and the degree of stress-induced immune suppression. So in a thing like a cortisol saliva test, you can measure the IgA and see if your high stress, your chronic stress, has started impacting your immune function. Dr. Karen just did a talk on this subject this past Monday. It is called 3 Signs That Stress is Impacting Your Immune Health. I haven't had a chance myself to listen to it, but I always love all her talks. And I definitely encourage you to follow up with that talk if you're interested in this topic. So that is just an introduction to the value of our skin and mucosal membranes for their barrier function, and the differences between our innate and adaptive immune systems, as well as the GALT and MALT functions. On Saturday at 3 p.m., I will be continuing on to give some practical tips on how you can support your mucosal lymphatic tissue and immune system through protecting your barrier function. We've all been using lots of hand sanitizer, and it's particularly drying. And that can affect our skin barrier function, so always keep moisturizer handy, especially for those of you who are more prone to eczema. And speaking about gut function and permeability, I wouldn't be able to do the topic justice without talking about leaky gut syndrome. So we will also be going into specific gastrointestinal nutrients to help repair the lining, that one cell layer thick lining that can be so easily damaged. Thanks for joining me today. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them, and If you missed anything, the summary should be up in a couple days. Enjoy the rest of this gray, rainy Wednesday in Vancouver or wherever you are. Okay, bye.